Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to see you here on this Palm Sunday as we start our journey to the heart of who Jesus is, with the promise of grace on Good Friday and the gift of new life on Easter Sunday. And as we enter this Holy Week, it just seems fitting to continue our labels teaching series because Jesus came to lift us beyond the limit, beyond the labels which place limits on our lives and shrink our world. But as we get going, let's be clear about something. Not all labels are such a bad thing. In fact, some are rather wonderful. They are life-giving. They bring us joy. Like the ones on the screen. That's Daniel and Xavier, the world's two most adorable grandchildren, and I'm always grateful to be labeled their Grampy, as is Karen, their Grammy. And I'm sure you carry life-giving labels too. Labels like best friend, which means someone sees you as a constant source of companionship and encouragement. I have a friend like that, Tim. That's him on the screen. We've shared life for nearly 50 years. And there are other life-giving labels too, like mentor or good neighbor. But today we're looking at labels that box us in, even imprison us, within a less than flattering view of who we are, which then stunts our imagination for whom we can become. Whether people impose these labels on us or we place them on ourselves, they shape how we see things in often destructive ways. They undermine our confidence, holding us back from becoming more. And they even call our faith into question. Look, let's be honest, folks. We all carry labels like these. And we wonder, could God really love someone like me? Can God really use someone like me? Well, here's the great news. As we've discovered these past weeks, the Gospels are full of stories about people who carry difficult, even destructive labels, but when they meet Jesus, the potential for change is now on the table because Jesus looks beyond the labels they carry. And we're going to look at another one of these stories right now. It's a wonderful story in John chapter 4, verses 3 to 18. You can look it up on a Bible app or in the red or black Bible under the chair in front of you. The story begins on page 1651 in the red and 1514 in the black. And by the way, I'm reading from the New Living Translation. So he, that is Jesus, left Judea and returned to Galilee. He had to go through Samaria on the way. Eventually he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar, near the village that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" Jesus replied, "If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water." "But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket," she said, "and this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? And besides, do you think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed?" Jesus replied, "Anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again. But those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life." "Please, sir," the woman said, "give me this water. Then I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water." "Go and get your husband," Jesus told her. "I don't have a husband," the woman replied. Jesus said, "You're right. You don't have a husband, for you've had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth." All right, so here's the setting. Jesus is on his way from Judea in southern Palestine to Galilee in the north, taking the fastest route, a 3-day journey through the land of the Samaritan people. The fastest route for sure, but still a long, hard walk. that got tougher as the sun climbed the sky to the heat of the day at about noontime, as it says in verse 6. Finally, Jesus and his disciples, tired, hot, hungry, thirsty, arrive at Jacob's well just outside the Samaritan village of Sychar, located at the foot of Mount Gerizim. The disciples head to the village to scrounge up some food, leaving Jesus alone at the well. The fact that Jesus is alone there isn't surprising. Why? Well, because women who did the hard work of fetching water for the village went to the well in the early morning, in the cool of the day. It was work you avoided in the midday heat. But there's something else here. This was work women never did alone. They went together. It was a social time with conversation and laughter and the news of the day. So the surprise in this story is what comes next. Verse 7, a Samaritan woman came to draw water. The fact that she's there alone at the wrong time with no other women makes us aware that she's carrying a label. She has a story to tell, a difficult story. But of course, Jesus already knows this. Verse 4, he had to go through Samaria. Notice the had. Jesus doesn't go through Samaria just because it's the fastest route. No, rather, he had a divine appointment to keep. A fact that's confirmed when Jesus, drawing on his divine insight, unpacks the story of her life. He knows all about her. Verse 18, you've had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. Here's the point. This woman's story has labeled her an outcast in the village. Scandal surrounds her. Her character is in question. She's morally suspect. At least that's how the village folks see her. As messy and immoral, a person you just can't trust to be around. But hey, let's be careful here. Labels don't need to be true to stick, right? There might be more going on here, and we'll come back to that later. But as for her neighbors, well, they've branded her an outcast. She's been pushed to the margins of village life. Isolated and alone, she's shunned by the other women, whom she avoids at all costs, even if it means fetching water at the worst possible time of day to avoid the whispers and cold judgment. And this woman carries another label, too. Remember the situation here. A Jew meets a Samaritan at a well. Without going into detail, just know that the Jews of Jesus' day saw Samaritans as racially impure religious heretics who practiced a distorted Judaism that seemed to almost mock the real thing. And the Jews were not impressed. And as for the Samaritans, well, they looked at the Jews as the lesser people who believed all the wrong things. The racial and religious tension ran both ways. So Jews and Samaritans didn't get along. Oh, and one more thing, a third label. The fact that she is a woman. Look, let's face it, folks. Back in the time of Jesus, men made the rules and women obeyed. Women were owned. They were property. They had no identity in their own right. They got their identity first from their fathers, then from their husbands. So the family home basically defined the boundaries of their world. The world outside the home was for men. Women were kept separate from it by strict rules. They never ventured alone on their own out in public, unless accompanied by a male family member who wouldn't speak to them, by the way, as they walked along. And they were prohibited from coming anywhere near a male stranger. Women were to be neither seen nor heard. It was a not-so-subtle label of insignificance. Yet here's Jesus, a Jewish man who's a stranger in a foreign land, alone at a well with this scandalous outcast Samaritan woman. If Jesus knew what was good for him, he would have avoided any entanglement at all costs. But what does Jesus do? Verse 7. Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." Jesus speaks to this woman. He takes a huge risk. He cuts across all the labels that divide them, and honest, life-changing conversation begins to flow, and trust starts to grow. Folks, do you see what's going on here? This woman is living with difficult labels that define her place in this world, a not so good place. And she can't escape them until she meets Jesus. Jesus dignifies her. He values her as someone with something to offer, something refreshing, life-giving, a cold jug of water on a hot, thirsty day. And so he places himself in a vulnerable position. He takes a risk and asks for water. And as they talk, the labels she carries start to loosen their grip. So what labels are you carrying right now? And are these labels writing a less than flattering story of who you are? Now, maybe some of your labels seem great at first. You're the smart one, the successful one, the champ. And everyone's always looking to you, and it kind of gives you a rush. But it's also feeding pride, a dangerous sense of superiority that's starting to cause problems. Or maybe instead you're being crushed by the unreal expectations these labels bring. Or maybe you struggle with labels on the other side: failure, addict, unwanted, divorced, invisible, damaged. And you just don't know how to change your story. And whatever labels you carry, you just can't imagine that God will show up to help you out. You're spiritually lost. You're on your own. Or are you? Well, let's find out. Jesus takes a risk because he's searching for a way into this outcast Samaritan woman's world. And when he speaks, he's polite. He's respectful. Please give me a drink. Just imagine if you were Jesus, all the things you could have said to this woman instead. What are you doing here in the heat of the day? Why is there no man with you? How come you've had so many husbands and now you're just living with a man? How do you think that would have gone over? Not well, I'm guessing. It would have been more of what she'd been dealing with from her neighbors, right? The last thing she needed to hear. Especially because it was incredibly unfair. The people of her village might have seen her as scandalous, but the reality was probably more complicated. We don't know why she'd had 5 husbands. The story doesn't tell us. Was there some moral failure? Perhaps. But her life likely involved a cascade of circumstances. Remember, in the time of Jesus, women were property. They were owned. They had no identity in their own right. So this means that all her marriages were arranged. They were essentially business transactions between dad and the prospective groom, with wealth changing hands for the privilege of marrying her. She had no say in all this, yet she carried the blame for it all. Maybe her first husband died, who knows? And the second one too. Women, girls actually, often just 12 or 13 years old, were often married off to much older men in this time. And maybe the next 2 divorced her. And keep in mind, men held all the power, women had virtually none. Men did the divorcing, women lived with the consequences. And it could well be that they divorced her because she wasn't able to get pregnant, which again, she would be blamed for. And maybe her last husband abused her or ran around on her, who knows? And she left the marriage just to get away from it all. But again, she would be blamed because it broke the negotiated agreement between dad and husband. And now 5 marriages on, she's shunned and outcast, apparently even discarded by dad. And her last and only option out of sheer survival is to move in with a guy who will put a roof over her head, no marriage contract. But in exchange for what? Like I said, her life was probably more likely a cascade of circumstances: loss, abandonment, broken relationships, perhaps abuse, sheer survival. But in a blame the woman society, this had all been reduced to she isn't even married to the man she's living with. She's been stamped with the label scandalous moral failure. This woman is carrying difficult labels. She's obviously dealing with deep hurts in her life. And what she needs most is to know that someone genuinely cares about her. Jesus has already shown that he is that someone by simply daring to speak to her. What an astonishing moment. And you can sense this woman trying to make sense of it in her reply to Jesus. Verse 9, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" In other words, don't you see my labels? Don't you see the barriers between us? I know my place, and I know your place. So let's just play the roles the world gave us, okay? But don't look past the fact that she actually does reply. The whole situation here dictates that Jesus and this woman should not be speaking to each other. Yet this smart, resilient, bold woman takes a risk too, because deep in her heart, she senses that this man is different. He really cares. And this gives Jesus the opening he needs. Having asked her to quench his physical thirst, he now shifts the conversation to her spiritual thirst. Jesus speaks in verse 10 about the gift of living water. Water that Jesus claims in verse 14 will forever quench a person's thirst. Those who drink the water I give them will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. Now, it's clear in verse 11 that the woman thinks Jesus is talking about plain, ordinary water. And look, it's an easy confusion. Ordinary water is life-giving too, right? We need it or else we'll die. As is her confusion about how Jesus will fetch this living water with no rope and bucket and what well he'll draw from, since everyone knows that Jacob's well is the only water source nearby. So she asks the obvious question, where would you get this living water? And yet she does like the sound of living water because it'll quench her thirst forever. Think of all the back-breaking labor it'll save her from. Verse 15, "Please, sir, give me this water. Then I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water." I suspect she said this with a sense of humor, humor that makes hard work lighter. Though I also think she was being funny to hide a conflict of emotions underneath. Living water would mean no longer taking her daily walk of shame alone to the well. Wonderful. But that walk and that time at the well was such a welcome break from the cold glares of her neighbors for just a little while. And speaking of welcome breaks and the benefits of some humor, have a look at the screen with his funny take on best before labels at the grocery store. Full confession, why is this still in your fridge might apply to just a few things in ours. How about yours? All right, back to business. Now, there's obviously something deeper going on in the conversation between Jesus and this woman. He sees beyond the surface labels of her story to the deep ache underneath, and he gains her trust precisely to take her away from that story, to focus instead on her deep need to know and experience real love. And something about all this starts to put down roots in her soul. She suddenly realizes that Jesus isn't talking about plain ordinary water at all. So her reply, "Please, sir, give me this water," is ultimately the deep down cry of a heart opening up, learning to trust, and ready to grapple with the truth. And Jesus is ready when that moment comes. He says to her, verse 16, "Go and get your husband." The words just hang there. How will she answer? Will she cling to her labels because, after all, there's some comfort in their predictability? She's learned to live with them. Or will she make a clean break? And how about you and me with the labels we carry? Are you and I satisfied to just stay put? Or are we ready for something new? Well, it's a testament to the trust and care this woman has experienced from Jesus that, far from backing off, she replies with honesty. Verse 17, "I don't have a husband." To which Jesus answers out of his divine insight, telling the story of her life. But not, and this is so important, not because Jesus is busting her for being a sinner. No, there's no attempt to guilt her. Instead, Jesus simply says in verses 16 and 17, "You're right. You certainly spoke the truth." He's acknowledging that in her honesty, I have no husband. She's now ready to grapple with spiritual matters of the heart, and he's ready to help her with his gift of living water. Megan Larissa Good, an important new voice in Bible scholarship, describes this moment of conversation like this. Let's read it out loud together. It's on the screen. Jesus names her story not to shame her, but to show her he sees her fully and stays. Jesus uses this moment to gently say, hey, I know you, but I'm not scared off by your story, and I'm not going anywhere. So what's your story today? What's mine? What labels are we all carrying? Are yours overwhelming you or guilting you or isolating you? Well, whatever your situation, please know this. Jesus knows your story, and he's not going anywhere. It's when the woman realizes this that Jesus now sets her on a new path. There's a whole chunk of this story we didn't read this morning, but let's unpack it now. And let's start by noticing that this woman isn't the only labeled person in this story. She has labels for Jesus. Not surprising, really. She's been treated that way, and she's learned to return the favor. What's interesting, though, is that as this woman breaks the shackles of her own labels, her labels for Jesus change too. At first, Jesus is a Jew, verse 9, not a compliment. But as they start to relate to each other, she calls him Sir, verses 11, 15, and 19. There's growing respect for this Jewish man. Then, when Jesus tells the story of her life, the woman realizes she's in the presence of a person with a more than natural perception of life and reality. Someone deeply spiritual who can see right inside her. So she thinks Jesus must be a prophet, verse 19 again. Which gets her to thinking, verse 20, now that this prophet has told me who I am with all my sins and shortcomings, maybe I should get things sorted out with God. But where should I do that, sir? At the Jerusalem temple like you Jews, or on Mount Gerizim like we Samaritans? To which Jesus replies, verses 21 to 24, that the old arguments are done with. They're finished. A new time is here. Verse 23, the time is coming, indeed it's here now, when a fresh experience of God is possible, when you no longer have to make an atoning sacrifice on a mountain or in a temple, and can meet with God face to face, in spirit and in truth. Reading between the lines, you sense that Jesus is willing this woman to open her eyes and see who stands before her. And everything suddenly comes into focus in verses 25 and 26. This is no prophet. No, he's someone far greater, the Messiah, who when he comes will explain everything to us. To which Jesus replies, I am. And with that, this scandalous outcast Samaritan woman is free. Through Jesus, the one who is indeed the way, the truth, and the life, John 14:6. The one who offers abundant life forever, John 10:10. She receives a new identity framed by uplifting labels that bring joy and hope to all of who she is. Jesus renames her, first of all, a disciple. This woman once was on the outside looking in, and she surely wondered at times where God was. But now she has seen the Messiah, the one who brings salvation, the one who makes all things new. And she believes and chooses to follow him. Jesus renames her a second way as well. We see something unfold from the moment they start having a conversation and trust starts to grow. And it all comes together in verse 21 when Jesus calls her, dear woman. It's the one time he calls her by name. And it's the same name Jesus uses for his mother in John chapter 19 when he's dying on the cross. And it comes from a Greek word that communicates an almost formal respect for, even a sense of deference towards this woman. All this to say that Jesus restores her humanity. The labels from her past that made her feel as if she were less than nothing, they're gone. She's a human being once again, a person worthy of love who stands on equal footing with Jesus as they speak together at the well. And Jesus renames her a third way. Now that this dear woman is a person of faith, she's ready to live out a new call in God's world. Verses 28 to 30. The woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?" So the people came streaming from the village to see him. This dear woman who came alone, who avoided people, who carried shame, now runs into town and invites people because she carries good news. The outcast is now the messenger and evangelist, bursting with joy to share the story of Jesus. And many Samaritans believed. Verse 39. All because of this dear woman, which leads us to the fourth and final way Jesus renames her. Remember, scandal once surrounded her. Her neighbors avoided her. But now when she goes to the village, they see and sense the profound change, and they listen to her, and they even take their lead from her. She says, "Come and see." And they go. Folks, do you see what's going on here? This dear woman, now living in faith out of a sense of God's call, is welcomed back into village life. Once she'd been dismissed, but now she's seen as trustworthy. Once she was a problem person, but now she's acknowledged as a blessing. And so they say to her, verse 42, "We know that he, Jesus, the one you introduced us to, is indeed the Savior of the world." Because of Jesus, this dear woman is restored to community. I invite the worship team to come back to the platform now as we wind things up. Well, John chapter 4 tells a remarkable story about the complete transformation Jesus can bring in a person's life. And there's a detail in that story. You probably noticed it a moment ago in verse 28. The woman left her water jar beside the well. That jar was her former life. It carried more than water. It carried the scandal, the isolation, the degradation, the shame. But now that she's met Jesus and drunk living water, she leaves it all behind and becomes a brand new person. We are now in Holy Week. The cross with its promise of grace, the empty tomb with its gift of resurrection life is in sight. This dear woman met Jesus, and she chose grace and life. And how about us? Are we ready to leave our old lives behind? Are you and I ready to meet up with Jesus? Are we willing to allow him to set our lives on a new path? This Easter, will we receive the abundant life only Jesus can bring? I invite you to think about those questions as the worship team leads us in our closing song, "O Come to the Altar."